Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Ite Namani.
There's a real energy that we derive from remembering the great privilege of having been in Prabhupada's company. It was not anything normal or usual. You ever go through this exercise, the 1 minute elevator pitch? If someone were to ask, what do you remember most about being with Prabhupada? The question itself is faultive. You don't not remember anything about it. Every second, every iota of time with Prabhupada was a revelation. He saw God in the details of the everyday. And having that image, there's a phrase by historian Saul Friedlander, who works in the area of memory within the minds and hearts of Holocaust survivors, and how memory works. And people sometimes say, why did the Jews allow themselves to be led to the slaughter like sheep? And his answer is that there was no image precedent to the Holocaust. There was nothing that you could look back in history and say, oh, I recognize this. This is like that. There was no such thing as scientifically designed mobile killing vans in human history. There was no such thing as automated crematoriums and gas chambers. There was nothing to look back on and say, we know what to do now. It's an awkward kind of parallel, but in the sense that there was no image precedent for those of us who had the privilege of knowing Srila Prabhupada. There was nothing that we could point to and say, he's like that. He's like something I've known before. There was nothing about him that was like anything we knew before. And I think over the years since his departure, at least for myself, looking back on those memories, there are things that have kept me literally alive. Just because it's a kind of cold, depressing world out there sometimes. And yet he saw something else. He saw another dimension. He lifted the corner of the rug up and showed us what was going on beneath the surface of things. So I'll do my best to recount some stories. Those of you who know me have heard some of these perhaps before. My great pleasure was, and honor was, to be with Prabhupada when he came to Europe and travel with him. And because I had started off as a student in Paris and spoke French, my then wife Jyotirmayi and I, Jyotirmayi is French, still, by the way, I'm proud to say, one of my best friends, we would take turns translating Srila Prabhupada. And that day was a particularly action-packed day. In fact, I remember at the end of the day sitting in front of Srila Prabhupada in his room and saying, do you realize, Prabhupada, you've been going at it for 16 hours straight? And he looked at me and went, Hare Krishna. What else is there? It started that day with an official reception at the Paris City Hall. We knew that Prabhupada, those of us who were there in the early days of the Krishna consciousness movement lived on different levels of awareness. There was the day-to-day awareness, which was usually just, you were going. You would get up in the morning, you would go. There wasn't any stop. There was so much to do. Every day was a volcanic eruption of activity. When you had a few moments to think about it, there was something else that you were aware of, and that is that there's something historic going on here. There was a sense of history. And we knew that Srila Prabhupada was doing something unprecedented. We didn't know as much about him then as we know now. There wasn't as much research, there wasn't as much in-depth analysis and study that had gone on to his life and his life before he came to the West and so on. But we knew that there was something historic in this, and that he enjoyed meeting with decision makers. He appreciated if we could set up meetings for him with professors, politicians, heads of state, heads of business, philanthropists, authors, scientists, people who were in a position of making a difference in the world, who had some resource, some influence. And especially in France, which at the time, perhaps still today to some extent, was the hub of Europe's intellectual life, there were opportunities to set up all kinds of meetings with important people for him. This one day, we started with a reception at the City Hall. Now this is a backup to your question about Cardinal Danielou. To be received by the mayor of Paris is something of historic consequence. Heads of state are received by the mayor of Paris, not anyone just coming to visit the city. The way it happened was that we were in the airport when the chief of protocol for the City Hall was there greeting the mayor of Bombay or some official from India, and we happened to have been in the airport to receive this person as well and give him a garland and so on. So we struck up a conversation with the woman who's head of protocol, and we said, well, you know, the spiritual equivalent of the man you're receiving in City Hall today is our teacher. And it would be altogether fitting and proper if he were received as well in City Hall. And this woman took it seriously. And a few weeks later, we got a letter from City Hall saying, et cetera, blah, 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 you know, or again in French, blah, blah, blah. And we would like to receive your spiritual master when he comes to Paris. Can you provide us with some background? So we sent this elaborate biography of Srila Prabhupada and all of his accomplishments and coming on the Jaladuta and the sacrifices he'd made and re-spiritualizing humanity. It was just like... And then we were told to please come to City Hall where we would be told the rules for such a reception. Now, I don't know, has anyone here actually been to the Hôtel de Ville in Paris? It's amazing. I mean, those of you who've been there, you can't, such a building will never be constructed again. It's just impossible to spend the time and effort and find the talent, you know, the skills, the artistic skills that went into creating this extraordinary monument to French history and government and art and painting. And the woman there met us and said, now the vice mayor of Paris, the mayor will be absent, the vice mayor will be coming into the room. She showed us the room. She said, when he comes into the room, the protocol has been throughout French history that the guest will stand. And then the mayor or his representative will give an opening speech, and then your teacher will be invited to respond. So the day came, and we drove Prabhupada to City Hall. And what was interesting about this is that all the devotees could not attend because Indradumna, now Indradumna Swami, was leading a Sankirtan party and distributing books and chanting in the metros, in the subway of Paris. So he could not be there. We walked in, and Prabhupada is looking around, like admiring this amazing building. And then we come into the main reception hall. There's a chair for him. Prabhupada sits down. And so the woman, the chief of protocol, comes up again and says, now here's how, just to remind you, and she says in French, that when the mayor arrives, your teacher will stand up, and then the mayor will greet him, and then he's invited to respond. So I'm sitting in a chair next to Prabhupada, and I'm translating this. I'm saying, well, I knew there was going to be trouble. I said, when the mayor walks in, you're supposed to stand up, and then he will. I didn't get to finish the sentence, and Prabhupada looked at me and said, I'm supposed to stand up for who? And I'm thinking, uh-oh. There goes our relationship with the Paris government. And sure enough, the vice mayor, gentleman, a three-piece suit, tie. Oh, by the way, the whole regalia was there. The guards with plumed, blah, blah, blah. And Prabhupada, the mayor walks in, and he stands, and he looks at us, and he's waiting. And he's waiting. And then he looks over at Chief of Protocol as though saying, "You didn't tell them?" And Prabhupada had his hands on his cane, and he's just looking at the man like this. And the mayor literally starts sweating. I mean, I could see this, starting to drip down his face. Because the press was there, and there were cameras, and there were lights. Yadubara, you had your lights set up. We have this on film or just photos? It's on film? So the mayor just goes right ahead and starts speaking and talking about how, France is such a spiritual country, and, over the generations we've received so many people here, and now we are honored to receive A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami to our hallowed halls. And then Prabhupada stands up and he says, "Mr. Mayor, you have spoken very nicely about how France is such a spiritual country. That's important," he says, "because if any government fails to teach the citizens that they are eternal spirit souls and that there is a supreme Godhead in control of creation, and that the government's job is to make a situation that is comfortable for the spiritual progress of its citizens, that government is a rascal government." And the writers are filling up their notebooks like crazy. Mon Dieu. And the French press did not take it well at all. The next day in the newspaper, they showed a picture of Prabhupada in the next room where they had set up a buffet, and Prabhupada was eating watermelon. He liked watermelon. So they happened to have caught a candid picture of Prabhupada with a piece of watermelon in his hands. And that was the photo that they ran in the French papers. Guru says this or that about France. I think I consciously blocked it out. I guess the point is that he was fearless under all circumstances. He had a real sense of who he was. This was not someone in any doubt. I think the word doubt probably had no room in the lexicon of words that describes Srila Prabhupada. He was there on behalf of his spiritual master. He knew what he had to do, and he did not compromise.
So during the 1976 festival in Vrindavan, there was, I believe it was Ram Navami, and there was a whole schedule that was started at Mangalarti and went all the way to midnight. Prabhupada was given a lecture that evening at Krishna's birthplace in Mathura. And there was a pandal set up, and 20,000 people came. So it was really very, very impressive. So, there was Mangalarti, and after Mangalarti, I got to go on a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada, we went down, I think it was the Cowherd Boys, where they used to take the calves, that trail. So Prabhupada walked for a very long time, and he was preaching very vigorously. And went on and on and on and on. Actually, on that walk, I started in the back, but every time Prabhupada would stop, to make a point, the devotees would go up close to Prabhupada, and then Prabhupada would start walking again. And so then they would spread out, so I would kind of run in, get up a little bit closer, And then finally I ended up right next to Srila Prabhupada. And after like an hour, Prabhupada actually had to pass water. So he turned and handed me his cane. So I took his cane, and they had a bottle of water for Prabhupada to wash his hand. Prabhupada went down into this little gully, and there's a little tree, and did what nature's called. And then he washed his hands, and he came back. In the meantime, I put the cane in my left hand, and I put my hand in my japa bag. And so I was chanting japa. So as Prabhupada was coming back, he reached for his cane, and like a fool, I started handing it with my left hand. Prabhupada said, "Left hand?" And immediately I went, "Oh," I was like, "Oh, I am an idiot, aren't I?" Okay, so I put it in the right hand and handed it to Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada said, "Always right hand." So then anyways, Prabhupada went back, continued the walk. It was about like an hour and a half walk, very long walk. He was making a lot of very serious points. And when he got back, we had a whole program there. He gave class, etc. Then they had all these dignitaries come from New Delhi. It was like the governor, big, what would be equivalent to like a senator, state representatives, meeting Prabhupada all day. And I was just hanging outside his room. Wasn't allowed to go in the room, but I was just kind of peeking in. And Prabhupada was just preaching like amazing all day long. And people were laughing, and you could just see the faces of all these dignitaries. Prabhupada he was like a lion amongst lambs. He was just preaching so vigorously. I was amazed. Then, that went on for the entire day. And then, of course, there was a festival, and then at night, we went to Mathura. And Prabhupada gave this lecture, which, as I said, about 20,000 people showed up. So Prabhupada started the lecture by saying, so because there are so many people here to hear Krishna's pastimes, and they may not speak English, I'm going to speak in Hindi, and I apologize. Prabhupada actually says, I apologize to my English-speaking disciples. Like he had to apologize to us. And then Prabhupada proceeded to give his lecture, and which was amazing because he would quote the shlokas. And it was just like a lecture in English. You could almost follow it because of it. But while I was sitting there, I was looking around. There was like 20,000 people. He's preaching about Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. And I'm looking at the devotees. There's devotees from Africa. There's devotees from Europe. There's devotees from England and Australia and South America. And I'm thinking about Bhaktivinoda Thakur, how he said, when will the Americans and Englishmen and Germans come and with their hands raised high say, Jai Sachinandana Gora Hari, right? When will that day come? And I was like, wow, the day has come. And there's all these devotees there. And I was thinking, Prabhupada, you did it. I was thinking, you did this. You have done this. And now you're preaching to 20,000 people, and you were preaching to all these dignitaries all day long. You've done it. You don't have to do anything else. You've done it. You can just, kind of rest on your laurels. You don't need to push. You've done it. You've done it all. And of course, with Prabhupada's accomplishment, there was fanfare. People really, he did an amazing thing, miraculous thing. So, one might think, oh, well, you're getting certain kind of distinction, and, people are appreciating that you're speaking to 20,000 people like this. But Prabhupada wasn't like that. He wasn't interested in that. He was just interested in glorifying Krishna. So what happened is the talk went on for quite a long time, into the night. And by the time we got back to Fogal Ashram, we were staying at Fogal Ashram, it was like midnight. And everyone was completely exhausted. The day was just like, I'm done, I'm like zombies, the Walking Dead. And, but unfortunately, I had gotten a little sick because I ate some jalebis in the marketplace, right? What is that place called down in Vrindavan? Whatever. Loi Bazaar. So, I got sick and, diarrhea. So I went to take rest and ran to, did my stuff and came back, lay down, 5 minutes later, get up, go back, lay down. Every time I laid down and relaxed, I had to go back. It was just really hellish. And this was like going on for about a half hour. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to be able to sleep. I might as well just stay up and go chant my japa. And I'll go down to the temple. And it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. So everyone was dead. Dead tired, exhausted from all the festivities. I was the only person. I walked down, I was the only person walking from Fogal Ashram. It was almost a little scary, actually. But also really sweet, too. Very quiet, very sublime in Vrindavan. I came in, and there was, also I was thinking, well, maybe I'll go do the 24-hour kirtan, because Prabhupada had initiated that. Well, when I actually got to the temple, there was one devotee, and he was laying on the mridanga, going, Hare, Krishna. It's kirtan, but I thought, I think I'll just chant my japa. So I came out the front of Krishna Balaram's temple, and I started to circumambulate. And as I came around the back of the temple, I was right next to Srila Prabhupada's room, and there was a light on. Now, Prabhupada has been preaching, tirelessly since 4 o'clock in the morning. It's 2 o'clock the next day. And in his room, he has his dictaphone. And he's going, Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakur says in his explanation of the Gita. And Prabhupada's translating the Bhagavatam. And I'm like, why? You've already done it all. You've done everything. You've done this big festival. There's no one around to see you doing this, but he was there translating the Bhagavatam. And he was doing it for us. That was the only, logical, he should be exhausted himself. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. He got back at midnight. And he's translating the Bhagavatam. And I got to I chanted my japa, and it was just me and Prabhupada. He didn't know I don't know if he knew. He knows whatever Krishna wants him to know. And I just got to watch him translate the Bhagavatam for about 20 minutes. And then his servant came out and kicked me out. I'm like, I'm not doing anything. But the amazing thing was Srila Prabhupada's tireless pursuit of giving Krishna consciousness to this planet, to this world, to this universe. And that's why he's the spiritual master of the universe.
I've been living with this memory since it first happened 40, I don't know, I was 19, so you do the math. Was that 46, however many years ago it was, the first time I met Prabhupada. He had just come from Moscow, meeting with Professor Kotovsky, and he came to Paris and he was going to give a press talk at the offices of Air India in the Boulevard de la Madeleine, a big street in Paris. And somehow the other devotees were delayed getting there. I was there, I was the first one there. I don't know, I took a taxi, I don't remember how I got there first. But again, I was just me, Prabhupada, behind the door where he had been resting after his flight, and his secretary. And I'm sitting there, there was a plate of Prabhupada's prasadam, and a dear friend of mine, Aradhana Das, who also came early, handed me a mango skin. Now, I had never met Prabhupada. I was initiated a year already. I had never met him. Sitting there sucking on this mango skin, weeping like an idiot. It's like, "Ugh." Because I knew Prabhupada was on the other side of that door. And then all of a sudden the door opens. And again, I'm tempted to say Nandu Kumar. Someone can correct me. I think it was, no, Prabhupada's secretary at that time in that trip from London. You would know, I'm not sure. Yeah. Well, he looked out and said, should I let them in, Srila Prabhupada, seeing me sitting there. It was just me. And I peeked around the door, and Srila Prabhupada was sitting like this on this bench where he had obviously been resting. And his hands were on his knees, and he went like this. I was flabbergasted. I was the first perfect thing I'd ever seen in my life. Just, there was no wasted effort, no fidgeting, no uncertainty about it. This was obviously the intentional gesture of someone in complete control of his faculties. And I had never seen, I knew about Prabhupada. I'd been hallucinating about Prabhupada for a year. And there he is sitting there doing this to me, like something out of classical ballet. It was just this beautiful gesture. And I came in and just like plopped down on my face in front of him. And then sat up. So I'm down here, and I'm looking up at him, and he's looking down at me. And, the tears are just streaming down my face. And he's looking down, unblinking, into my face like that. Now, I've thought about this for 40, however many years it is. And I'm still trying to go inside that experience to understand what was going on. Now, look, truth be told, there I was, 20 years old, an only child of divorced parents, not exactly a happy childhood. When I joined the temple, people say, how did you become a Hare Krishna? That's one of those questions. Anyway, how long have you got? There's a psychological answer, there's a socio-historic answer, there's a spiritual answer. There's that mysterious dimension to that answer that no one can possibly understand. So I've thought about it so much at that moment, what that moment was, what was going through my mind, and it just felt very natural. It was disturbing in some ways to feel like life had just begun. That 20 years of life had been kind of preparing me for this particular moment. And what he saw in me, I don't know. But once again, getting back to the temple after this press conference, which is a whole other series of memories, I was the first one back. And Prabhupada was in his room. I went into the other room. We were sharing quarters in that room next to Prabhupada where the tulsi bushes were being kept. And then I heard Yogesvara. I came running in. And so this is the first time I'm talking to Prabhupada. And he's sitting on a cushion like this. Pardon me imitating. But he was sitting like this with one leg up, and his hand was in his bead bag, and he was tracing circles on his head, like this. And his eyes were closed, and he looked at me. He didn't look at me. His eyes were still closed. He said, throughout my entire life, I have never forgotten Krishna. And then he opened his eyes and held his hand out like this. He said, even when I was a boy, I had my dolls. He called them his dolls. And he showed me about how tall, maybe this far off the floor. That's another one of those things. Why? Was he concerned that maybe I had doubts about him? That he needed to reassure me that it's okay for me to give my life to him? That he's not going to harm me? We were talking about this earlier with Hari Suri and I, about what is it that you remember about Prabhupada? The overwhelming sensation is a person of authority who will never hurt you. He will never hurt you. That this person has only my well-being at heart. He would never do anything to hurt me. And that was the sensation at that moment, that if he's bothering to tell me this, it's because he's confirming for me, it's okay. It's all right. We'll continue on together as spiritual master and disciple. You have nothing to fear. You have nothing to fear. Those memories, it's taken 40 years for me to actually come to a point of understanding some of these memories.
I got my Brahmin initiation from Srila Prabhupada in 1974 in Chicago. And they had fixed Prabhupada's room up inside the Brahmachari ashram. It was quite a large ashram, and they had separate rooms. They fixed up a room very nicely for him. So Prabhupada would call each of us in individually, and then Prabhupada would give us the Gayatri mantra, etc. So this was actually the first time, of course, this was the first time I'd seen Srila Prabhupada. I met, the first time I saw him was at the airport, the day before, but actually associated with Srila Prabhupada. So, and I'd been distributing his books for almost 2 years. And finally I was actually telling everyone, you should follow these books because this person is special. Now I'm actually meeting the person, so that was an incredible moment for me. So Sudama Maharaj was Prabhupada's servant, and they had a Vyasa they had brought from Detroit, and they placed in the Brahmachari ashram. And he had these 2 bowls of frankincense on either side of the Vyasa, and he had them really smoking. And it was like, Prabhupada appeared to like it actually, but this smoke was like billowing along the bottom of the Vyasa, and it looked like clouds. It looked like Prabhupada was like sitting on a cloud. And he was sitting really straight on the Vyasa. So I came into the room and I offered my obeisances, and just an amazing thing happened. And I know I've watched many of your tapes, and our God brothers and God sisters have also had that experience. I was totally unprepared for it, but as I offered my obeisances, and I was still on my knees. I looked up, Prabhupada was looking right into me. And I mean, like our eyes connected. And it was like an infinity. And I've never had anything happen like that before or after, of course. And he was looking, and it was as if he was looking into my very soul. And it was just an amazing moment, as if he knew all the nonsense that I was. He knew exactly where I was at, all my degradations, all my hang-ups and attachments. It was just like, I was just like an open book. He was like reading an open book. And I couldn't hold the gaze. I had to look down, right? But the amazing thing of that gaze, that look, wasn't that, oh, you are filthy, even though I am, or you're degraded, or you're a malecha, all the above, true, check, right? But he was looking with this look of infinite compassion. It was this look of like so much like love and compassion for my condition being here in this material world. And it was like, I can take you out of this material world. And at that moment I thought, this personality can actually save me. So I was still on my knees, and Prabhupada said, come close. So I kind of scooted up on my knees. And Prabhupada said, give me your right hand. So he took my right hand and he put my thumb on the middle digit of my ring finger. And he said, so you chant these mantras on each digit of your hand. And then he took my thumb and he moved it from digit to digit. Now, I had not actually watched any of my Brahmin godbrothers do Gayatri Mantra, so I hadn't a clue what he was doing with my fingers. But he was moving around, and then of course, just being touched by the pure devotee, that was an astounding thing in itself. So, so then he started the mantra, Om, Bhur, Bhuva, Svatat, etc. And I repeated it. And then at the end of it, Srila Prabhupada said, so you're chanting 16 rounds? I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. And he said, and are you preaching Krishna consciousness? And I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada, I'm a Sankirtan leader in Detroit. And then Prabhupada lifted his fingers like this and he said, always preach Krishna consciousness. And that was his instruction to me. And I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada shook his head like, all right. And then I thought, well, you know, how many millions of births has it taken for me to actually come into the association of an Uttama Adhikari, Mahabhagavad, a Nitya Siddha from the Goloka Vrindavan itself. And now I'm right in front of him. So what do I should ask something very pertinent, something very relevant, something very deep, right? And because all his books pretty much answered all my questions, so I just said, Srila Prabhupada, can I touch your lotus feet? And as soon as the words got out of my mouth, I turned like 3 shades of red, right? I was like, did I really just say that? And Prabhupada looked at me and said, that is not necessary. And I went, Jai Srila Prabhupada. So, okay, so now, you know, then I went outside. Actually, Sura and Vaishesheka were outside. What Prabhupada saying? What'd you say? And I said, I said, can I touch your lotus feet? But there was, what had happened is, at that time, we had just started Guru Puja. Because prior to that, in '73, we didn't do Guru Puja, and then Prabhupada introduced it. And I really, really love Guru Puja. It's like the most ecstatic moments of my life are in Guru Puja. Because the lotus feet of this pure devotee are the only way we can attain pure devotional service. We bow down to those lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By His grace, we can cross this ocean of material suffering and attain the mercy of Krishna. And then also, I just got a couple things from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, 2 verses that Lord Chaitanya quotes. It says, O King Rahugana, without taking upon one's head the dust from the lotus feet of a pure devotee, one cannot attain devotional service. And devotional service is not possible to attain simply by undergoing severe austerities and penances, by gorgeously worshiping the deity, or by strictly following the rules and regulations. One can only get devotional service by taking the dust from the lotus feet of a pure devotee. And then it says, unless human society accepts the dust of the lotus feet of great Mahatmas, devotees who have nothing to do with material possessions, mankind cannot turn its attention to the lotus feet of Krishna. Those lotus feet vanquish all the unwanted, miserable conditions of material life. So you can see there's a method to my madness. Those lotus feet vanquish all the unwanted, miserable conditions of material life. So then what happened, I was Prabhupada's bodyguard. So I had to stay outside Prabhupada's room. And every time Prabhupada, he'd go out, he'd go to the restroom or whatever, go take prasadams. He would walk out the door and I would offer my obeisances. And about 6 inches from my face was his lotus feet. But now I can't take the dust because he said that's not necessary. So I always kind of harbored that desire in my heart to have the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada, right? To get the dust of the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada. So 3 years later, I was in Vrindavan in 1977, and I was sitting in Srila Prabhupada's room. at Prabhupada's feet. And it was an incredible time in our history of ISKCON, because Prabhupada was in his Ancha Leelas. And they were massaging Prabhupada's arms. Pendra was on one side, Tamal was on another side. Someone else was massaging Prabhupada's head. And Trivikram Swami was massaging Prabhupada's feet. And of course, I'm eternally indebted to Trivikram Swami. But so I'm sitting next to Maharaj, and I'm watching him, and he's massaging Prabhupada's feet, and he's putting Prabhupada's feet on his head. And I'm going, ooh, oh, he's so fortunate. You know, and then I'm thinking, in my mind, I'm having this debate. I'm going, hey, you're here in Vrindavan, just in the room with him, right? Even 1/11 of a second in the association of pure devotee is more important and more powerful than 1,000 Vedic sacrifices. So just be satisfied, right? But no, he had those lotus feet. So I was sitting there chanting japa, and I was thinking, how am I going to get Maharaj to let me massage Prabhupada's feet? Of course, I've been in Sankirtan for 4 years, so you know I had to get my pitch ready. So I was waiting for the opportunity. And after about an hour, it was like a miracle. Maharaj yawned. And as soon as he yawned, I was like, oh, I know what I'm going to say. So I kind of crept over and I said, excuse me, Maharaj, you look like you're really tired. I know you've been here for a long time. And I was just wondering if it would be okay if maybe I could massage Prabhupada's feet. And he turned and he looked at me like this, you know, heavy duty, sannyas look, and he goes, okay. And I was like frozen in ecstasy. So then he showed me, how to massage Prabhupada's feet and rub, his calves. And he had to be very delicate because Prabhupada's condition was, he did not have much, he didn't have any muscle tissue. But his feet were definitely lotus. They were amazing. So I got to massage Prabhupada's feet, and I got to put his feet on my head. So, and I got to massage his feet for 2 hours. And so after about an hour of massaging his feet, Prabhupada said to Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he said, because Prabhupada was going blind, and he couldn't even see to the end of the bed. And so he had to ask who was in the room, and he said, who is massaging my feet? And Tamal Krishna said, oh, it's Udayananda from Detroit. And Prabhupada's big smile said, oh. And it was like, and of course, I felt like this, again, wave of ecstasy. And it was like, I just wanted to touch Prabhupada's feet. But Prabhupada was like reciprocating so nicely with the devotees. He was like, like they say, you take 1 step to Krishna, he takes 100 steps. Prabhupada was like taking 1,000 steps. He was just like pouring his mercy on the devotees. It was just incredible. And I just felt, wow, Srila Prabhupada, you just fulfilled all my desires. I just wanted to touch your feet, but you let me put those feet right on my head. That's Srila Prabhupada's mercy.
We drove him from there to the home of Cardinal Danielou. Danielou came from a very well-regarded family. He had a brother, Alain Danielou, who was one of France's leading Indologists. It's an interesting family dynamic, if you can think about it. You've got one brother goes the India direction, and the other brother, one of the leading religionists for the Church of France. Danielou had actually done I did a little research on him. He'd done some important theological writing with regard to the role of Jesus in society. But he came from that school of thinking which held that souls only inhabit the bodies of human beings. Now, our theology, our Krishna consciousness theology is rather simple. We say that all life, whether it be human or plant or bacteria or flowers or animals, whatever it may be, anything that we say lives is a spark of God, of the same quality as Krishna, the Supreme Person, but in minute quantity. Because we've been in this material environment for many, many, many lifetimes, we have forgotten our original spiritual nature. By chanting Krishna's names, we can revive the awareness of ourselves as eternal beings, which is present in our hearts, but now it is covered over. That's it, in a nutshell. That's basically our whole theology. But that one foundational principle, that all life is a divine spark of God, is lost on some people who ascribe consciousness and self-awareness only to humans. So Danielu was like that. Not a bad person, but for him the important aspect of Christian theology was, you might say, engaged Christianity. That phrase, using that word engaged, came from the 60s with Thich Nhat Hanh, who used it to describe engaged Buddhism as a way of moving your Buddhist faith into the arena of social action. Danielu was of that persuasion with regard to Christianity. And so when he met Srila Prabhupada, the conversation kind of gravitated rather quickly to this issue of the soul in all forms. I can't understand you Hindus. Why you prefer to see your children starve than to kill the sacred cow? I don't understand. And Prabhupada was sitting there, just let me speak. He said, let me speak. He said, first we have to define what are the symptoms of consciousness. And he took him through step by step, a very, very clear, elementary, you might say, understanding of what are the symptoms of the soul within the body. And to a certain extent, Daniela was accepting, but he couldn't break free from what he had studied and written about for so many years. And so he was obviously uncomfortable with this. But Prabhupada held his ground. He said, if you want to eat meat, there are other bodies that are more appropriate. Why not take the birth of, take birth in the body of a tiger, for example? A tiger can eat meat quite easily. You have a hard time eating meat. It's not easy to eat meat. Daniel, well, it's been wonderful having you here. I have to go now. He was really getting uncomfortable. And all during the car ride back to the temple, Prabhupada talked about how important this is.
So in 1976, I was on the Radha Damodar Traveling Sankirtan Party, and we went to Sridham Mayapur for the Mayapur Festival. And we were sitting in Srila Prabhupada's room. Prabhupada had like 80 boys in the room. And we're all sitting there, and we're all just looking at Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada looked over at me and said, what are you reading? I had a Chaitanya Charitamrita on my lap. It was the second volume of Adi Leela. So I said, I was so excited to, the Prabhupada was talking to me, I was like, oh, Srila Prabhupada, this is Chaitanya Charitamrita, second volume. It's the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya with Prakasananda Saraswati. And what happened is that Lord Chaitanya was invited to dinner with all these sannyasis. He didn't want to go, but this one Brahmin was begging him to go. So he came in after all the sannyasis were already seated. And, and I'm telling the whole story to him, right? Like in all this detail. And then he started to glow like a million suns. And like all the brahmacharis, they're looking over their shoulder at me, Uday, what are you doing? So I got done telling the whole story. And Prabhupada, and then I realized, you know, this is the author of this book. He wrote the book. He knows what's in his book, right? I'm telling him all about this book. So, but Prabhupada just looked at me. And an example of dhira, of how the pure devotee is so deep. You cannot understand the mind of the pure devotee. Prabhupada looked at me with this look, and I did not have a clue of whether he was pleased, he was upset. It was just like dhira, just this look. Like, was that necessary or not? It was just like, and all I know is I got a lot of ribbing later on by my godbrothers.
We have a responsibility, and it's fascinating how principles of memory migrate over into the things that challenge us in Krishna consciousness. In a sense, we are also the inheritors of memory. Those of us in the first generation who knew Srila Prabhupada, we are compelled by that privilege to recount to you these memories and these stories. You know, I could tell you a simple story, like I remember in Paris, Prabhupada teaching us how to cook, and there was a young brahmachari there, and Prabhupada was saying, no, first you put in this ingredient, and then you put in that ingredient, and then he looked at the brahmachari and said, and don't let the butter get too near the fire. I'll let you interpret that one. So, you know, you can tell these lovely little stories, and they're important to getting a sense, a composite picture of who Srila Prabhupada was. But do we not have as well an additional responsibility? I'd almost, if I may paraphrase Thomas Aquinas, who in law talked about a secundum quid, an additional level of responsibility. People who go into law, it's not just a career. You're there defending the pillars of the democratic process. Those of us who enter a life of Krishna consciousness have a secundum quid, an additional level of responsibility, not just to remember Srila Prabhupada and to follow the principles, but also to understand what was Prabhupada's vision for the future. I'll get into a little bit more of that tomorrow. So my hope is that as you hear these stories about Srila Prabhupada, those who are doing the telling and those who are doing the listening will all go deeper down into what's the deeper meaning? How am I involved in that story? What does that story have to tell me? Let me give you an example. We're on a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada in London. I don't know, maybe you were there, Shamsundar. I kind of conflate pretty much all my memories of Prabhupada with you. And in India, when neem twigs were available, Prabhupada would use them as toothbrushes. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but neem has medicinal qualities, and if you chew on the end for a while, you can make it like bristles. And that's what Prabhupada would use to brush his teeth, these little neem twigs. Well, in London, there weren't too many neem trees around. So as we were walking through New Hyde Park, there was a willow tree, and I'm trying to remember who his secretary was at that time, Nanda Kumar. He said, go get some twigs, and his assistant went over and broke a twig off, reached up and broke a second twig off, and he was about to reach up to break a third twig, and Prabhupada stopped him and said, no, don't disturb more than necessary. Who's thinking about it? He didn't want to disturb that tree. You know? And that got me thinking, what is he seeing that I'm not seeing there? So later I went to him and I said, Prabhupada, what do you see when you look at a tree? He was always very patient. I would ask him the most outrageous things, and he was always very patient. I said, what do you see when you look at a tree? And then I generalized it because I thought, well, maybe that's making him uncomfortable. What does a pure devotee see when he looks at a tree? And Prabhupada said, well, you don't exactly see a tree. I mean, what you see is the body of a tree, and you know there's a soul that is residing in the body of that tree. And then he thought for a minute and said, but then again, the soul is never alone. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hrideshe arjuna tishtati. Within the heart of the soul is Krishna. So looking at that tree, he would see not just the soul there, but also Krishna within the heart of that soul. So in a sense, you actually see Krishna. That's my Prabhupada. You know, so he didn't want to disturb that tree more than necessary.
I'm in Vrindavan, and it's 1976 at the festival. And actually, my friend Pragoj helped me to get on this morning walk with Srila Prabhupada. And it was just brahmachari sannyasis. And Prabhupada was very, very grave. Very, very grave. And he was very animated on this walk. And he was talking about making vows and keeping vows. And he started talking about the whole entrapment of this world for a man is a form of a woman. And he was saying that this form of a woman will keep you from going back to Godhead. The attachment for this form of the woman, for your enjoyment. And Prabhupada went on and on. He said, especially for sannyasis, he said, vantashi. It's like you vomit this material. Well, you give up this world, it's just you vomit. And Prabhupada is very graphic. And he said, and then you go lick it up. Vantashi. And we were like, actually, you didn't want to look at, Prabhupada could burn you to ashes there. And everyone was like, gulping, right? And Prabhupada went on walking. And he then stopped and said, if you can conquer woman, you can capture Krishna. If you can conquer woman, you can capture Krishna. And not that, obviously it's not a physical thing, like, we're going to fight. No, it's that attachment for enjoying a woman. And how, he said, how vigilant you must be as a sannyasi. Have no association with women. Because for a sannyasi to again take up the association of women, vantashi. So I became a grihastha after that, but I still remember that penetrating. Especially for sannyasis and brahmachari, no cheating. There's no cheating, because Krishna is in your heart. And if you can conquer women, you can capture Krishna.
The question to him was, what should I tell, I think at the time I was president of the Paris Temple, and I said, what should I tell people when they say to me that they don't understand their relationship with you because they don't see you, you're always traveling, they don't get to spend time with you, they don't feel like you know them, they don't get a chance to ask you their questions directly. And in the Vedic times, students would live with the guru, in the ashram, and there was a personal relationship. And at first he asked, what do you tell them? I said, well, I tell them they shouldn't feel deprived of your company. You've invested yourself in your books. And if they read your books carefully, they'll find that relationship with you. And he said, first you should ask them if they're chanting their 16 rounds. He said, unless you're following the basics, where is their question of a deeper relationship with the spiritual master? And that was very telling. Thank you for remembering that morning walk. This knowledge is realized knowledge. Krishna consciousness is not something that you can just study and you'll understand it. It doesn't happen like that. You can't just read the Bhagavad Gita and become Krishna conscious, because it's realized knowledge. Your spiritual progress is not something that you make. It's something that is given to you when you qualify to receive it. So how do we qualify? Well, it's keeping association, discussing the teachings. There used to be something, remember Ishtagostis? we used to get together every week just to talk about things that were important to us, What's been hard for me this week, what kind of obstacles am I encountering to following the principles, to being Krishna conscious? Do I have any doubts? We would talk about these things. I don't know if there still are Ashtagoshtis, but they're very important. You know, keeping good company allows you to share your realizations. It gives you access to other people's experience. Maybe they're going through the same challenge that you're facing. And if you talk with them, you can benefit by what they've learned, what they've discovered. And I guess I'd have to say, in our first generation, those of us who knew Srila Prabhupada, maybe this was our biggest mistake on a basic level, is that we didn't always know. We're very good at quoting verses. We weren't always really warm-blooded, good human beings with one another. And as a consequence, people went away. You know, it's real easy to say, oh, well, that person left because of sex. It's real easy to say that. It's easy because we can understand it. You know, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more going on there. If we don't feel the greater intimacy of living in a spiritual family, then that physical and mental sexual part gets exaggerated, and it can distract us and throw us off track. So that sangha, that association that we have, is one of the greatest gifts that Prabhupada gave us. One of the greatest gifts that he gave us. He gave us the holy names. He gave us his books. He gave us his life. And he gave us one another. You know, you are Prabhupada's gift to me, and I wish to deserve that and earn that. I need your company in my life. I can't make spiritual advancement in Krishna consciousness without you.
So we were at the Mayapur Vrindavan Festival, 1976. Had a very, very ecstatic time in Sridham Mayapur. And then we went to Vrindavan. And the ecstasy just flowed on. When we were doing Guru Puja, Sudam Maharaj was leading the Guru Puja. And, you know, he had a beautiful kirtan voice. And he had a lot of deep love for Srila Prabhupada. So I was about 10 feet away from Srila Prabhupada. And one of my godbrothers, Panchatattva Das, was standing next to me. He also recollects this pastime. It was very, very vivid. So Sudama was leading the kirtan, and of course, everyone was just fixed on Srila Prabhupada. And you know, he started out Shri Guru Charana Padma, and then gradually built up. And as he got to, I was watching Srila Prabhupada was playing the kartals. And he got to Abhyasa Gusak Tribhuvana, right? Dwapade Laila Sarana. Prabhupada was playing the kartals, and everyone was chanting and dancing and focused on Prabhupada. And then he went, Prabhupada Patita Pavana. And Prabhupada was playing like this. And all of a sudden, his hands started to flail, and almost like uncontrollably. And then he went like this, and dropped his head to his chest, and went into like trance. And just at the moment when they said, Jaya Prabhupada, this happened just at that moment. And this wave of ecstasy just flowed over the devotees. Everyone, at almost simultaneously, just lifted off the ground. And it was, Jaya Prabhupada. And it was just like your hairs were standing on end. You were just feeling, you know, tremblings in the body. People were crying. And Prabhupada fell like that into the trance. And then within like 20 seconds, he picked up his kartals, and he was like in the perfect beat. He just didn't miss a beat. And there was like 500 devotees from Gaurnitaj's altar all the way over to Radhashama Sundar's altar, and they were just leaping like in unison. It was just an amazing thing. And of course the kirtan continued, but after the kirtan, Prabhupada got up and left the Vyasasan, and Panchatattva said, did you say that? I said, yeah, I saw that. So it was a moment of seeing Prabhupada feel that ecstatic symptoms that, you know, we're always anxious to achieve in chanting the holy name.
I'll give you one little story, one anecdote about Prabhupada's humility. There was a group of French religionists who came to Paris, to the Paris temple, and they were asking Prabhupada to tell them something about the mystical dimension of Krishna theology. They wanted to know, what are the deep secrets of Vaishnava religion? So Prabhupada said, well, there's no illicit sex, there's no meat eating, there's no gambling. No. They say that's the external. We'd like you to go deeper and tell us something about the very deep mystical dimensions of your philosophy. Yes. So there is no meat eating. And they're saying, but this is all external. I mean, that's on the level of the body. We want to go deeper. And the more they would push him, the more he was visibly becoming agitated. Because these are people representing themselves as, the followers of Jesus Christ. And that's what was getting to him. And he said, you eat meat, but Jesus says, do not kill. Why do you do that? This is all external. They continue pushing on this. And Prabhupada, I don't know if there was a transformation of color in his face, but it could have been, because he was so upset by this. And finally he looked at them and said, do you believe that Jesus gave his life for you? And they looked at one another and said, well, yes. Do you believe that he gave his life to absolve you from your sins? Yes. Then why do you sin? We literally, we were pushed back against the wall by the force of this energy coming at us from Prabhupada. And then he started crying. He started weeping. He says, you do not love Jesus. You do not love Jesus. And that's one of those moments that takes forever to process, because what's going on there? Today, looking back on it, I would say to you that what was going on there, he knew what it meant to give your life for God. He knew the sacrifice involved in that. And then to have someone brazenly misrepresent the life that Jesus had given to God, and so cavalierly dismissing the foundational principle. Don't kill. How can you claim to love Jesus and avoid that elementary teaching that he gave? And he was weeping. I must say that moments like that, I think, embedded him deeper in my heart than many others that I can think of, where he made some very important point of philosophy. This was something that was so palpable, it was so real.
So I was on a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada. This was in Chicago in 1975. And we were walking along for some time on Lakeshore Drive. And we came up to this pier, this fishing pier. It went way out into the lake. And there were some people standing on the end of the pier. And Srila Prabhupada said, what are they doing? He said, oh, they're fishing, Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada got really grave. And he said, they are fishing now, and later the material energy will fish them. Very, very heavy, almost angry. They are fishing now, and later the material energy will fish them. Don't go fishing.
I made the mistake once of trying to praise him. That was a huge, huge mistake. Huge. He liked someone to read to him while he got his massage. So I'd be reading Chaitanya Charitamrita usually, and in Paris. And he'd be getting his massage, and I kind of moved around a bit. And there was one of those sections in Chaitanya Charitamrita where it says, if you take this bus to the 3rd station and then switch for the local train and you go 2 stops and you go around the building at the train station, you'll see a rock there and the rock. Like all of these details among details among details. And I said, what's with all the details? How come you wrote so much details into your commentaries and your purports? And he said, because this will substantiate for people the historicity of our movement. When they read that there is so much rich detail in history, they'll understand this is nothing invented. So for some reason, the person giving massage had to leave the room. So I'm sitting there with Prabhupada. I'm continuing to read. At one point, I was just a little overwhelmed by it. And I said, I don't know how to thank you for doing this. You know, we read these books, and I was kind of grasping for words. And just at that moment, I looked up, and he had gone into this kind of, his head was bowed, and he was just, no, going back and forth, back. And I realized what a terrible mistake I had made. First of all, he was cornered, and I had taken advantage of that. You know, it's not like there was anyone else in the room. And secondly, he did not want to hear himself praised at all. He took no credit, none whatsoever.
Again, in 1975 in Chicago, I was on the morning walk. We were walking along the shoreline, Lakeshore Drive. And because it was early in the morning, this traffic was really flowing fast, and of course it was jammed up. And Prabhupada said, where are they going? And someone said, they're going to work, Srila Prabhupada. And he said, just see, they're suffering. They're simply suffering. And then he said, they have made no advancement. They're just advancing and suffering. And then I actually audaciously said, well, Srila Prabhupada, they say they build big skyscraper building, and that's a symptom of their advancement. Prabhupada said, these skyscraper buildings, they are like pigeonholes. He said, they're like birdhouses, and they're just pigeons in these skyscraper buildings. He says they drive breakneck speed, so much anxiety in this traffic. Then they spend all day, they work so hard in these pigeonholes. And then they drive back in the traffic, so much suffering. And he said, and they come to their big, big house. But it's so late, they eat some food and they go to sleep. So who is enjoying this big, big house? And he said, the dog. Then he said, the dog is enjoying, they are working hard, and the dog is enjoying in their big, big house.
In Holocaust historiography, the objection is often raised that witness testimony is imperfect and unreliable, that survivors do not always remember accurately. Many years have passed. They remember selectively because there may be things that were embarrassing and they care not to remember. They're the ones who have to live with these memories, so sometimes they sanitize them. The way they present something that they witnessed or participated in will often be in a way that they need to tell it so that they can hold their head up in public. Sometimes people simply forget. Memory is fallible. Sometimes we have an agenda. We'll tell something because we want to promulgate a particular point of view. So you're quite right. On the other hand, those who defend witness testimony, by testimony I mean often these days it's video testimony, such as Siddhanta has done. That in a sense is a kind of video testimony, what we're doing here, recording this. There is a value to memory even if it is imperfect. There is an emotional memory that has its own validity, so that something doesn't necessarily have to be historically accurate in every detail in order for that memory to have relevance in the world moving forward. People will remember a circumstance, and because they are so absorbed in that, for example, I cannot recall for you dates and places. I'll tell you stories about Srila Prabhupada, and I don't always remember where or when that happened. I know the memory happened, but I can't necessarily recall the day or the hour or the place. So does that negate the memory? I don't think so. It qualifies it in some ways, and we do have to be very careful, extremely careful. Deniers, whether it is in philosophy or in Holocaust history, will feed off of inaccuracy in order to discount the whole thing. Oh, you see, he was wrong about that detail. The whole thing is wrong. So we have to be accurate as far as possible. But that does not mean that if something is somehow imperfect because of memory being imperfect, that therefore the entire experience should be rejected. So I will tell you, for example, that I can remember being with Prabhupada in Bhubaneswar in January of 1977. It was the last time I saw him. And he was seated behind a low desk, as he often was, but the weather was very warm, so he was stripped to the waist. This was 10 months before he passed away, nine months, something like that. And he was in a little hut at that time, Bhubaneswar, which is a very valuable plot of land, but it was undeveloped, so it was just a few straw huts. And he looked around the hut and he said, "Sometimes they put me up in extravagant apartments. And sometimes I'm in a little straw and clay hut." He says, "What's the difference?" He says, "The sensations are all the same." And then he leaned over conspiratorially and he said, "This is the problem in France. They're thinking we are living in a big palace." I remember that particular moment because, having come from France, I was aware of the challenges there, and it, frankly, was the problem. We were in this big, extravagant location, and I think we kind of lost sight of what the heart and soul of the Sankirtan movement was all about. But I cannot recall other things that he told me at that time, and I wish I could. I don't remember. I was asking Hari Sori, you were there. Do you remember anything else that happened when we were with Prabhupada in Bhubaneswar? I don't remember. So does that negate the other things that I do remember? I hope not.
So, Srila Prabhupada there was an ongoing tug of war of Srila Prabhupada going to Govardhan Hill. And so, they finally, dissuaded him that it would kill him, right? I mean, that was the view of some. And maybe they were right, I don't know. But one day, Prabhupada said, because Prabhupada was just in his room, he wasn't even leaving his room. He was just in his bed. He was just being moved around in his bed. So, one day Prabhupada said, "I want to see Krishna Balaram." So Tamal got his palanquin, and he said, "Udayananda, I want you to carry Prabhupada," with another devotee named Manohar. So he was in the front, I was in the back. And we picked up the palanquin. It was like nothing. It was really not that heavy. And when you looked at Srila Prabhupada, he couldn't have weighed more than 80 pounds. So that's like lifting 40 pounds. Okay, I was 24 years old then, right? I was a big guy. Not an old man like now, but. So he said, carry Prabhupada. I said, "Yes, sir." So Prabhupada got all ready, and we helped lift Prabhupada onto the palanquin. I went to pick up the palanquin, it felt like I was bench pressing 400 pounds. It was so heavy. I could barely stand up. I mean, it was like, this is like Guru's heavy, it must be. And I was like, wow, how am I going to walk with this? Anyways, we started walking, circumambulating. We came out of Prabhupada's room, and all the devotees, they actually were assembled outside of Prabhupada's room. It was nice. Tamal did make that arrangement to bring all the devotees there. And they were so happy. People were laughing, they were crying, they were dancing, they were chanting. And Jai Prabhupada, and we brought Srila Prabhupada out. And we started to circumambulate Krishna Balaram Mandir. And we went around 3 times. And then we brought Srila Prabhupada in before Gaur-Nitai's altar. And Prabhupada, looked at the deities. And then he, lowered his head, and everyone offered their obeisances. And then we moved Prabhupada in front of Krishna Balaram. And we got Prabhupada in front of Krishna Balaram. Prabhupada, if you could have just seen his eyes, he was just transfixed on Krishna Balaram. It was amazing. And I was just staring, I couldn't look at the deities, just looking at Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was so transfixed, like when he went through Gaur-Nitai's altar, he just did the regular, honoring the deities. But when he got in front of Krishna Balaram, they played the whole Govinda tape, and then they started a second one. And right after the second tape had started, I'm looking at Prabhupada's face, and this big tear came out of Prabhupada's eye. And then Prabhupada went like this, and then we moved him. And then we carried him back, carried him out, went out the side door and carried him around the temple. And the devotees are just going wild. It's just amazing. And we brought him back into his quarters. And we put him in his chair, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, Srila Prabhupada, the devotees are ecstatic. And Prabhupada said, I am also ecstatic. And then he said, Srila Prabhupada, we will take you out every single day. And then you'll get stronger, and we'll take you all over Vrindavan. And then we'll take you to Govardhan. And then you'll get stronger and stronger, and you can preach stronger. And then we'll take you all over the world. And all the devotees went, Jai! And Prabhupada had a big smile. And he just kind of nodded like this. And I very much appreciated what he was saying. He gave pleasure to Srila Prabhupada.
My understanding of that additional responsibility that we have in remembering Srila Prabhupada is to use those memories in service to his mission. How are we furthering his mission? By remembering him. Now, if Prabhupada's purpose, as stated in the Papers of Incorporation for ISKCON, is the re-spiritualization of humanity, which is interesting. He didn't say the Krishna consciousnessizing of, he said the re-spiritualizing of humanity. We have to ask ourselves, what does that mean today, 50 years after he arrived here? And myself, I think that if he were here today, he would say, so what have you been doing all this time? Why aren't you advising heads of state? Why aren't you involved in decision-making in areas of finance and agriculture? And why aren't you mediating in areas of armed conflict? And why aren't you there to facilitate education in different parts of the world? And why aren't you there taking a more active stance in pushing the vegetarian agenda, not as a health issue, but as a spiritual issue? Why aren't you doing this and why aren't you doing that? He told me, he said, that's my business. I was in Rome. I went to see him and said, Prabhupada, when are you going to retire? And he said, what can I do? They like when I come to the temples. I said, yeah, but we also like when you come out with a new book. So if you retired, maybe we'd get more books. And he said, it's my job. That's my job. I've got to push. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And he literally took a finger and started poking like that. I think if he were here, he'd be poking us, saying, where is the evidence that you've reached your capacity? Show me one shred of evidence that you've maxed out, that you've hit the ceiling, that this is all you can do in this lifetime. Is that the example that I came to set for you? Push yourself. Push, 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 push. We're not retiring. There is no retirement in Krishna consciousness. We're going on. So myself, I look back on those memories, those days, those weeks, those precious times with Prabhupada, and I think this is meant to energize me to go and do more. You know, he used to say, he said, what good is it being an American if you can't do something wonderful? He actually said that to me one time. So we should do something wonderful now. I think that's the secundum quid for us.
So I was at Krishna Balaram guest house, and we had just seen Srila Prabhupada. We were in our room, we probably cried for about an hour after seeing him in his condition. Then I went and took a shower, put on a new cloth. I was going to go out and chant before the deities. So I came walking past Srila Prabhupada's room, and as soon as I passed Prabhupada's door, Upendra came out and said, "Excuse me, Prabhu, could you do me a favor?" And I stopped and I said, sure, what is it, Prabhu? And he said, "Could you come in and be with Srila Prabhupada?" And I said, excuse me? He says, Srila Prabhupada has been asking for all his devotees to be with him, and no one is coming. And I said, are you kidding? He said, no. Would you please come in and be with Srila Prabhupada? I was like, would you please get on this flower airplane and go back to Goloka Vrindavan? Let me think, right? So I said, sure. So I came in. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon at this time. And that's when I sat down at Srila Prabhupada's feet. And I got to stay in his room till 10 o'clock that night. And then Prabhupada said, okay, everyone should take rest. So when I was leaving, Upendra says, thank you, Prabhu, for coming and spending 8 hours with Srila Prabhupada. And I was like, Prabhu, this is like surrealistic, okay? This is like every devotee's desire is to be in Srila Prabhupada's association at all times. And I said, so can I come back tomorrow? And he said, oh, would you? And I go, yeah. and then I said, well, when can I come? And he said, when would you like to come? I said, well, how about right after Mangalarti? And he goes, that'd be great. So for the next 2 weeks, I would go to Mangalarti, and right after Mangalarti, I'd go into Prabhupada's room and stay till 10 o'clock at night. Okay, and I got to massage Prabhupada's feet every single day. So that was how much Prabhupada was reciprocating. But the point I wanted to make is that during that time, it was extremely painful to hear how Srila Prabhupada requested, not just once, every single day, he would request, why my devotees are not coming. And Prabhupada said one day, he said, why they are not coming? Don't they want to be with me? And then he said, has my association become that poisonous? And as a matter of fact, Trivikram Swami was sitting right next to me. I spoke to him just last week. And he said, Uday, remember when Prabhupada said, has my association become that poisonous? And I goes, yeah, Maharaj, I remember that. So it was a great travesty. I know how many God brothers, God sisters would have wanted to be with Srila Prabhupada at that time. And Prabhupada wanted that. That was like Prabhupada's final request. And for whatever reason, it didn't happen. It's just tragic.
Sometimes the notion of Maya can be very difficult to understand. How it is that we live in a world that is not illusion. This is not illusion, this world. Maya does not mean illusion. It is illusory. This is also real. It's not illusion, but it's temporary. So on a morning walk in, in perfect memory, I think it was Paris, Hanuman, as a Canadian devotee, was walking and saying to Prabhupada, I don't understand. He says, this feels so real to me. Why do we say we're living in a world of Maya when it feels so real, it seems so real? I know that I'm here. This is my body. I see things around me. This isn't a dream. I'm seeing it. He was very passionate about how he's describing this. And Prabhupada said, when you sleep at night, do you dream? And he said, yes. And Prabhupada said, the only reason why you think the daytime dream is more real than the nighttime dream is that you spend longer awake.
During Prabhupada's departure, or just prior to his departure, we've all seen pictures of it, but to actually see Prabhupada in person like that, it was mind-boggling. It tore your heart right out. And but the amazing thing is that Prabhupada, even though he had that condition, he was translating Srimad Bhagavatam, he was running the movement, he was cracking jokes, he was telling jokes. And it was just phenomenal how he could do everything. Even translating his books, he couldn't even pick up the dictaphone. Someone had to pick the dictaphone up. But his consciousness was crystal clear. It was crystal clear. It's amazing. And one day we're sitting there, and then Prabhupada, right out of the blue, he started to talk. He said, I've given you this big ISKCON movement. If you can, please expand it. He said, at least maintain it. Don't let this decrease. And then he said, please cooperate, as he said so many times. And then Prabhupada started to cry. And then everyone in the room actually started crying. That was probably the most painful moment of my life, to see Prabhupada cry. So we have this movement, it's Prabhupada's movement, we have the good, we have the bad, we have the ugly, but we just have to be determined, never leave ISKCON movement. We just have to always try to push it forward. If there's a problem, push it forward. Because when you leave ISKCON, you make Prabhupada cry. So let's make Prabhupada happy and push on Krishna consciousness to every town and village.
Je anilo premadana Karuna prachu שאני לא